Pay close attention, everyone. You are worn out. It isn't because your daily burden is too heavy. It isn't because you lack grit. It's because your intellect is constantly waging wars against ghosts that do not exist. It happens every single night. You close your eyes seeking rest. Yet, your brain initiates a brand new courtroom drama. Every past blunder is dragged out for another trial. Every awkward silence is interpreted as total isolation. Every vague moment in your future becomes a complete catastrophe before morning arrives. You convince yourself this is just wisdom. You call it foresight. You call it maturity. But what if the internal guide you have leaned on for decades is actually the thief robbing you of your sanity? Consider it deeply. How many terrible futures have you already survived that never actually materialized? How many arguments have you rehearsed 1,000 times, only to find the actual interaction looked completely different? How many hours? How many sleepless nights? How many beautiful days have been ruined by anxieties that existed strictly within your own skull? The ultimate cage was never made of iron bars. It was constructed from invisible doubts, voices that murmur, "What if you fall? What if they turn away? What if your world shatters?" And without even noticing, you began treating those dark whispers as absolute facts. Over 20 centuries ago, two individuals walked diametrically opposed paths. One entered the world in bondage. The other held total authority over the greatest civilization on Earth. One rested on cold stone. The other rested inside a golden room. Yet both arrived at the exact same realization. The true conflict was never external. It was always happening inside the head. The captive discovered that physical chains cannot bind a disciplined spirit. The ruler realized that absolute power cannot bring stillness to a chaotic heart. Their journeys proved a reality that the modern world still desperately tries to ignore. Your misery is rarely caused by your actual circumstances. It is manufactured by the narrative your brain spins about those circumstances. And here is the scary part. Most individuals never challenge that inner narrative. They spend their whole lives fighting imaginary battles, rewriting the past, dreading a tomorrow that hasn't happened yet, and throwing away the only real moment they will ever possess. This exact second. That is precisely why Stoic philosophy has outlasted the fall of regimes, the destruction of cultures, global conflicts, betrayal, heartbreak, and thousands of years of human pain. Because fundamental truth never goes out of style. Over the next few minutes, you are going to uncover 7 enduring psychological shifts. These aren't cheap motivational slogans or toxic positive phrases. They are practical mental frameworks that have allowed ordinary citizens, commanders, fighters, thinkers, and survivors to remain perfectly steady while their entire world was crumbling down. If you truly grasp the concepts ahead, you will never view vulnerability the same way again. You will never view anxiety the same way again. And for the first time in memory, your internal mind might finally become the most peaceful sanctuary you possess. Let's dive into the initial principle, because this is where the transformation begins. Truth 1. You command the sail, never the sea. There is a massive error that virtually every person commits without consciously noticing. We exhaust our energy trying to govern variables that were never placed under our authority. We try to dictate how others perceive us, how fast our achievements arrive, whether a partner stays, or whether reality matches our precise blueprint. And when life refuses to fall in line, we don't just feel let down, we feel completely betrayed, as if the universe broke a contract it never actually signed. The moment you wake up, your subconscious begins bargaining with tomorrow. You check your notifications, demanding a specific text. You send a pitch and wait for the flawless response. You pour your heart into a project and automatically expect the environment to reward you exactly how you envisioned. Without realizing it, your emotional stability is mortgaged to variables that have never belonged to you. And the second your joy relies on external factors, dread quietly takes the wheel of your life. This is the exact reason so many people feel completely drained, even on days when nothing goes wrong. They aren't exhausted by the weight of their actual lives. They are exhausted by the impossible task of trying to manipulate the universe. Every delayed text feels like an insult. Every sudden pivot feels unfair. Every mystery becomes a brand new reason to panic. They are fighting a war that cannot be won because they are trying to conquer territory that isn't theirs to rule. Centuries ago, Epictetus laid bare a realization that still has the capacity to completely reset a human life. He observed that certain aspects of existence are completely up to us, while the vast majority are not. It sounds almost incredibly basic until you realize that virtually every ounce of mental suffering starts the moment you mix up those two piles. The second you try to rule what is outside your domain, you abandon what has always been yours to keep, your internal stability. Reflect on the last dilemma that kept you tossing and turning. Was it actively happening in the room with you, or were you desperately trying to force an outcome that belonged to the future? Perhaps you wanted someone to validate you. Perhaps you demanded absolute certainty before taking a leap. Perhaps you wanted tomorrow to promise you that everything would work out. But tomorrow said nothing, and your anxiety mistook that quietness for a threat. Picture holding a heavy chain anchored to a raging gale. You pull with all your might. Your palms roar, your muscles burning, your pulse skyrocketing. Yet the wind doesn't shift an inch. It was never influenced by your muscle. But it was never waiting for your consent. The only variable changing was you. With every frantic tug, you became weaker, while the gale raged on exactly as it always had. Now picture a different scenario. Picture letting go of the chain. The gale is still blowing. The uncertainty is still present. But suddenly, your life force is no longer being squandered on a battle you could never win. For the first time, you have the bandwidth to focus on what actually rests in your hands. Your next choice, your next move, your next breath. That single transition alters the entire game, because your strength was never about controlling the weather. Your strength was always about deciding who you would be while standing out in the rain. Marcus Aurelius grasped this truth better than almost any leader in history. He managed a massive civilization, plagued by border wars, internal treason, pandemics, and collapse. He could move legions, yet he could not dictate destiny. He could sway millions, yet he could not control the future. So instead of wasting his days demanding guarantees from the world, he conquered the only territory that would completely obey his commands, his own integrity. That is why posterity remembers not just the territory he managed, but the mindset he refused to compromise. Examine your own daily routine closely. How much mental fuel have you burned trying to alter someone else's viewpoint? How many evenings have you traded away trying to forecast a future that never requested your input? How many incredible experiences evaporated because your focus was chained to results that were never yours to determine? The honest answer is likely heavier than you care to voice. And that realization shouldn't cause you shame. It is designed to hand you the keys to your freedom. The biggest breakthrough of your life won't happen when you finally manage to control every variable around you. It will happen when you realize you never needed to in the first place. The minute you stop demanding guarantees from existence, existence loses its capacity to paralyze you. The minute you let go of specific outcomes, your work becomes sharper, your mind becomes still, and your spirit finally gets room to breathe. Truth 2. Most of your nightmares exist only in ink. There is a trick your brain plays so subtly that you rarely catch it in the act. It takes a mere vulnerability and slowly hardens it into an absolute guarantee. A brief delay is translated into abandonment. A minor slip-up is labeled as absolute failure. A hazy future is treated as a certain train wreck. Reality hasn't shifted one bit. Yet your nervous system starts firing as if the worst-case scenario has already landed. Think about how frequently your intellect has pickpocketed joy from a completely peaceful afternoon. A message sits unread for 4 hours, and suddenly you weave a story that someone is angry with you. Someone speaks with a slightly flat tone, and you immediately start digging for underlying slights that don't even exist. A single unexpected hurdle drops into your lap, and before the sun goes down, your creativity has already constructed an entire bleak future out of panic rather than reality. The terrifying reality is that your physical body cannot tell the difference between a vivid imagination and actual experience. Your adrenaline surges, your chest tightens up, your sleep evaporates, your mental wheels spin out of control. You experience genuine physiological trauma over events that exist exclusively inside your imagination. By the next afternoon, your external environment is perfectly fine, but your internal state is completely fried from a war that never actually occurred. Seneca understood this reality long before modern neural research could map it out. He remarked that we are ruined far more often by our assumptions than by our actual circumstances. Those syllables have endured for 2 millennia because they perfectly describe the invisible quicksand that millions of individuals step into every single day. The human brain is incredibly well equipped to scan for danger, but horribly bad at identifying objective truth. Picture trekking through a dense forest at twilight. In the grey mist, you spot a dark, looming silhouette blocking the path ahead. Your pulse accelerates. Your frame goes rigid. Every survival mechanism screams at you to prepare for a fight. You take one hesitant step closer, and suddenly you see clearly. It was never an attacker. It was just the stump of a fallen pine tree. The terror felt 100% genuine. Even though the threat was completely non-existent, your subconscious reacted with full force. Your thoughts operate the exact same way. They present you with vague outlines and convince you they are monsters. They write scripts without any evidence. They draft the tragic ending before the first chapter is finished. And because anxiety speaks with absolute certainty, you mistake its panic for intuition. The longer you entertain the script, the more real the illusion becomes, until you are no longer interacting with the world. You are interacting with a horror movie your own mind put together. Look back at the crises that kept you awake 12 months ago. At that moment, they felt completely overwhelming. They felt permanent. They felt like the absolute end of the road. Yet today, many of those issues have dissolved so completely that you can barely recall why they felt like life or death situations. The catastrophic future you braced for never showed up, but the stress you generated while waiting for it took a massive toll on your body. Marcus Aurelius enforced one strict mental rule upon himself. Whenever his brain tried to sprint ahead of the present, he forced his awareness back into the immediate square foot of reality, not because tomorrow didn't matter, but because tomorrow wasn't real yet. He recognized that the intellect becomes highly destructive the second it flees what is happening in exchange for what might happen. So the next time your thoughts start writing a tragic screenplay about the future, hit pause and ask yourself one clarifying question. What are the objective facts right now? Not what do you dread? That single query separates fiction from reality. It shatters the illusion of anxiety and drops your focus right back into the only space where peace can actually take root, the present moment. Truth 3. Dropping the anchor is not quitting. There is a silent conflict that millions of people wage every single morning, and almost all of them get crushed without understanding why. It isn't a battle against bad luck. It isn't a battle against physical pain. It is a war against reality itself. They spend their days wishing the past had played out differently, waiting for life to apologize for things that have already been written in ink. But reality has never altered its path just because someone threw a tantrum. You tell yourself that if you analyze the situation just a little bit longer, you will finally unlock why it happened. If you replay that painful interaction one more time, maybe the conclusion will magically soften. If you keep carrying the weight of that setback, perhaps the universe will notice your misery and decide to rewrite history. But every single minute spent fighting with yesterday is 60 seconds stolen from the only day you actually have the power to change. This is the psychological prison that keeps people emotionally paralyzed for decades. They think that acceptance is synonymous with waving the white flag. They assume that acknowledging reality means endorsing what went wrong. So they keep fighting, convinced that misery is a form of strength. Yet every single day, that internal friction quietly burns up another gallon of their peace until total burnout starts to feel like their natural state. The Stoics noticed a truth that most individuals completely miss. They realized that reality does not care about your complaints. The rain doesn't dry up because you hate getting wet. The clock doesn't tick backward because you regret a path taken. Life doesn't edit yesterday just because your heart refuses to accept it. The universe simply keeps rolling forward with zero regard for your permission. Picture standing waist-deep in a roaring mountain river. The rapids are trying to sweep you downstream, and you are desperately digging your heels into the rocks, fighting the flow with every ounce of muscle you have. Every second, your frame grows weaker. Every breath becomes shallower. The water never slows down. It isn't because you lack will. It's because you are fighting a force that never asked for your consensus in the first place. Now picture turning your frame and floating with the flow instead of fighting it. The river hasn't changed its speed. The rapids are just as intense as they were 10 seconds ago. But suddenly, your energy is no longer being incinerated by resistance. For the first time, you can steer with intention instead of panic. The current that used to feel like an executioner becomes a force you can finally navigate. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to welcome whatever cards he was dealt, simply because they were already on the table. He didn't write those reminders while relaxing in a garden. He penned them in military tents, surrounded by war, plague, loss, and betrayal. He understood that suffering is always a two-part equation. The first part is the event itself. The second part is the internal debate inside your own skull, screaming that it shouldn't have occurred. That second layer of pain is almost always the one that breaks us. Reflect honestly on the most painful chapter of your journey. Perhaps a relationship crumbled. Perhaps an opportunity vanished that you thought would sustain you forever. Perhaps life slammed a door shut that you spent years trying to unlock. The event was painful. There is no point in denying that. But ask yourself with radical honesty, how much of that ongoing agony came from the event itself, and how much came from your refusal to admit that the door was locked? Acceptance doesn't delete sadness. It doesn't magically heal a broken heart. It doesn't pretend that tragedy is a blessing in disguise. Acceptance simply ends the exhausting war between your mind and the universe. The exact moment that conflict ceases, something incredible happens. All the energy you use to burn fighting the past becomes instantly available to design your future. That is why letting go is never a sign of weakness. It is one of the most courageous choices a human being can make. Anyone can scream at a done deal. Very few individuals possess the grit to drop their armor, look reality dead in the eye without excuses, and ask the only question that matters: where do I go from here? Truth 4. Your focus is your only real currency. There is an asset in your possession far more precious than your hours, your cash, your social status, or your natural capability. It is the one asset that every single human receives in identical amounts, yet almost everyone hands it over to strangers without a second thought. It is your focused attention. Wherever your attention lands, your entire life quietly follows. And if an external force dictates your attention, they are systematically steering the trajectory of your existence. Most individuals wake up under the impression that they own their minds. But before they even finish their first coffee, their focus has been completely hijacked. A single notification shifts their biochemistry. A stranger's digital comment shatters their self-worth. A bleak headline obliterates their optimism. Without even realizing the pivot, they spend the rest of their waking hours reacting instead of acting, chasing every shiny distraction as if it earned a right to occupy space inside their skull. Your attention is exactly like light passing through a curved lens. When it is diffused, it barely warms the surface, but when it is concentrated onto a singular point, it gains the intensity to burn through steel. The human intellect operates under the exact same physics. A fractured mind becomes fragile, anxious, and deeply fatigued. A highly concentrated mind becomes anchored, clear, and virtually impossible to break. Marcus Aurelius understood this law better than most people ever will. He reminded himself that he possessed the ultimate veto power, the choice to simply not have an opinion on the matter. Consider how revolutionary that concept is. Not every slight requires a rebuttal. Not every current event demands your panic. Not every critic earns a seat inside your heart. The ultimate victory isn't winning every single fight. It's realizing that the vast majority of battles aren't even worth showing up for. Look with brutal honesty at what filled your thoughts today. How much of your currency was spent on yesterday's errors? How much was squandered on tomorrow's hypotheticals? How much was handed over to people who don't even know you exist? While your mind is busy living in every other zip code, the only place where your life is actually occurring, quietly, slips away like sand. Picture standing on a dark stage surrounded by 100 blinding spotlights. Every single beam represents something screaming for your focus. An old regret yells your name. A future worry signals from the shadows. A smartphone flash blinks brighter than everything else. Someone else's opinion demands center stage. Eventually, every single light turns on simultaneously, and the stage becomes a blinding mess where you can no longer see your own feet. You aren't drowning because life got heavier. You are drowning because your focus has been sliced into 100 bleeding pieces. This is exactly how anxiety stays alive. It doesn't require an actual catastrophe to thrive. It only requires a lack of focus. The second your attention drifts from the immediate task, fear steps in to guide it straight into the dark, into a future that hasn't happened, into a past that cannot be rewritten, into simulated debates that will never take place. And every single hour spent in those zones is an hour your real life quietly packs its bags and leaves. Epictetus pointed out that people are not traumatized by things, but by the frameworks they build around those things. Your attention is the laboratory where those frameworks are forged. Feed your focus with dread, and dread becomes your default reality. Feed it with envy, and no milestone you hit will ever feel like enough. But train that focus to return, relentlessly, to the single action you can execute right now, and something extraordinary begins to shift. The ambient noise drops away, not because the world suddenly got quiet, but because you stopped feeding the amplifiers. The next time your thoughts start drifting toward a variable you cannot manipulate, catch yourself before you follow it down the rabbit hole. Ask yourself one basic question. Does this asset deserve my attention, or is it just screaming for it? Those two things are worlds apart. The world will never stop fighting for your focus. Wisdom is acting as a ruthless bouncer, deciding what gets to stay and what gets left out on the street. Truth 5. The clock is ticking for the storm, and the sailor one of the most convincing illusions your brain ever manufactures is the feeling that this current moment is permanent. It tells you that the agony you feel today will color the rest of your story, that this specific grief will never scab over, that this mistake will define your reputation forever, that this anxiety is now woven into your DNA. But your mind constantly confuses a passing cloud for a permanent ceiling. Look back at the version of you that existed 5 summers ago, the crises that completely consumed you, the nights that stole your rest, the problems that felt mathematically impossible to survive. Back then, they felt like the absolute final page of your book. Yet today, many of those hurdles have dissolved so completely, they are nothing more than faint footnotes. The storm felt like the end of the world while you were standing in the downpour. But every single storm eventually runs out of water. The real tragedy isn't that humans experience pain. Pain is simply part of the contract of being alive. The tragedy is that people build an actual house inside a temporary season of pain. They furnish it with despair. They convince themselves that because life feels brutal today, it is guaranteed to feel brutal forever. They stop taking swings at opportunities. They stop letting people in. They stop believing tomorrow can surprise them. Not because reality has locked them in a cage, but because their own patterns have. The Stoics regularly practiced a habit that modern society spends billions of dollars trying to avoid. They meditated on their own mortality, not to get depressed, but to wake themselves up to the staggering value of the present. Every single morning they opened their eyes was one morning closer to their final breath. Every conversation could be the final sentence. Every laugh, every quiet evening, every breath carried a value that only absolute scarcity could reveal. When you truly internalize the reality that your time is finite, you stop wasting your currency on imaginary terrors. Marcus Aurelius frequently noted to himself that both praise and insults evaporate into thin air. Empires crumble, beauty fades, success gets rewritten. Even the names of global conquerors are eventually turned into dust by time. Time does not bargain with anyone. It quietly sweeps everything into the ocean. The question is never whether life will change. The question is whether you will spend your brief flash of existence actually living, or just panicking about living. Picture holding a handful of dry sand and squeezing your fist as hard as humanly possible. The tighter you squeeze, the faster the grains shoot out through your knuckles. Now picture simply opening your palm flat. The sand is still moving. Time is still passing. Nothing about physics has altered, except one crucial variable. You are no longer exhausting your muscles trying to freeze what was never designed to stand still. Life has always operated like that handful of sand. The more desperately you claw for absolute guarantees, the faster your peace slips through your fingers. Ask yourself a question that most people dodge their entire lives. If you knew for a fact you only had 12 months left on this planet, would you spend tonight agonizing over a stranger's digital comment? Would you lose another night of sleep over a mistake that occurred months ago? Would you keep putting your joy on hold until every single variable became flawless? Or would you finally recognize that absolute perfection was never the point? Absolute presence was. This is the exact reason the Stoics wore the phrase memento mori like armor, not because they were morbid, but because remembering death taught them how to truly live. Every pulse beat became a miracle. Every ordinary Tuesday became extraordinary. Every massive challenge became insignificant compared to the sheer luck of simply existing. The awareness of the finish line didn't make them hopeless, it made them absolutely immune to trivial anxieties. One day, every single dilemma keeping you awake tonight will be completely gone. Every single person reading this script, including you, will eventually be a memory. That isn't a reason to dread life. It is the ultimate reason to finally start living it. Because the clock has never been your executioner. It has always been your greatest teacher. Truth 6. Sanctuary is built, never discovered. Most people spend their entire lives hunting for peace, as if it were a physical location waiting for them somewhere down the road. They assume it resides inside a larger zip code, a fatter brokerage account, a flawless romance, a specific body fat percentage, or a perfect phase of life. They whisper to their reflections, "Once I get past this hurdle, then I'll finally relax." But years roll by, benchmarks shift, wins lose their luster, and peace remains exactly where it has always been, 5 steps ahead of wherever they are standing. The cruelest part of this cycle is that every time you finally arrive at the destination you thought would make you whole, your brain quietly installs a brand new criteria, another benchmark, another prerequisite, another mountain peak to scale. Peace is perpetually delayed until next quarter. You keep running faster and faster, convinced the finish line is just around the next bend, never realizing the track itself was engineered to have no end. Look carefully at the individuals who possess everything society tells you to want. Wealth beyond comprehension, global fame, icons of achievement that millions pray for. Yet behind closed doors, many of them are fighting brutal daily battles with panic, deep isolation, destructive habits, and profound emptiness. If peace were an asset you could purchase, the wealthiest would be completely serene. If peace were a byproduct of achievement, the most successful would never feel shattered. Reality paints a completely different picture. The Stoics grasped a reality that our current culture desperately tries to sweep under the rug: The quality of your human experience is never dictated by what you hold in your hands. It is dictated entirely by the condition of the mind that holds it. A chaotic intellect will turn a luxury resort into a prison cell. A disciplined mind can walk straight through a chaotic crisis without losing its anchor. The external world is merely a mirror of the internal state. Marcus Aurelius held keys to an empire that most modern people cannot even fathom. He commanded legions and held absolute authority over the Western world. He could alter the fate of millions with a stroke of a pen. Yet when he sat down with his journal at midnight, he rarely wrote about conquests or gold. Instead, he kept hammering home one quiet truth. Very little is needed for a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. He possessed the world, yet he knew the world couldn't give him sanity. Picture carrying a glass filled with muddy water everywhere you travel. No matter how breathtaking the scenery around you becomes, every single time you look down, the water in your hands is still completely cloudy. Most people spend their lives searching for a better view, instead of just letting the dirt settle in the glass they've been holding all along. They swap careers, they relocate to new cities, they exit relationships, they even completely overhaul their aesthetic. Yet everywhere they unpack their bags, the exact same restless mind is waiting for them at the door. The moment you internalize this reality, a massive pivot occurs. You stop asking, "How can I control my circumstances?" and you begin asking, "How can I master my own perspective?" That single pivot alters the entire universe, because a steady mind can navigate a brutal life, but an untrained mind will suffer even inside a flawless one. Peace isn't achieved the day your life finally stops throwing punches. It is forged the exact moment you stop expecting life to be easy. It is constructed every single time you choose wisdom over a knee-jerk reaction. Every time you choose appreciation over resentment. Every time you choose bravery over avoidance. These tiny micro-choices seem microscopic in the moment, but layered together, they form the bedrock of an unbreakable spirit. One day soon, life will catch you off guard again. Someone will misinterpret your intentions. An asset will vanish without warning. A plan will collapse at the worst possible time. Those moments are mathematical guarantees, but if your stability depends on external weather, every single breeze will knock you flat. If your sanctuary is built inside, every single storm is just another chance to prove that your mind no longer takes orders from the world. Truth 7. The ghost you are evading has already vanished. There comes a specific crossroad in every single journey, when you realize your absolute worst enemy was never an external rival. It was never your worst failures. It was never your structural limitations. It was the version of yourself that flat out refused to let go of who you used to be. Most individuals are not trapped by history because history has teeth. They are trapped because they keep feeding an identity that reality has already moved past. Listen closely to your internal dialogue. How frequently does it rely on the exact same structural anchors? I should have done this. If only I had chosen that. Why did this happen to me? Those phrases seem innocent enough, but they act as anchors holding you inside a reality that has completely ceased to exist. Every single time you repeat those scripts, you pump oxygen into ghosts that have no business breathing. The past possesses zero leverage over you, until your intellect decides to offer it a home. Picture hiking through a valley while dragging a massive, heavy iron chain behind you. At first, you barely notice the drag. After a mile, every single step feels like torture. Eventually, you become so habituated to the weight that you forget what it actually feels like to walk without friction. Then one day, a passerby points at the link and asks, "Why are you dragging that?" You turn around, fully expecting to see a guard holding the other end. Instead, you look down and realize your own fingers are white from gripping the chain. This is exactly how personal narrative works. The human brain would honestly rather suffer with a familiar, painful story than face the open space of becoming someone entirely new. That is why people constantly introduce themselves using old scars. "I'm someone who got burned," I'm a failure. I was abandoned. I'm just not built for that. After repeating those scripts for a decade, they stop feeling like memories and start feeling like laws of physics. Eventually, the pain stops being an event they survived and becomes the definition of who they are. The Stoics recognized that every single sunrise presents a clean slate, not a second chance to edit yesterday's script, but a brand new opportunity to stop living inside it. You are literally not the same person who committed those old blunders. Every single breath has altered your biology. Every single crisis has remolded your character. Every single hard lesson has rewritten your operational system. Yet your brain keeps demanding that today's version of you continue serving a prison sentence for an error committed by a past version of you who doesn't even exist anymore. Marcus Aurelius never asked his reflection, "Who was I yesterday?" He asked, "What kind of man will I choose to be right now?" That single question holds more raw freedom than most individuals discover in an entire lifetime. Because your future is never constructed by the person you used to be. It is built exclusively by the choices you execute after deciding that your past no longer holds any legal jurisdiction over your present. Reflect deeply on the ultimate version of yourself you hope to build. Steady, composed, courageous, wise. Now ask yourself one highly uncomfortable question. Can that version of you actually step into the room while you are busy maintaining the identity that keeps you small? The math doesn't work. Every single evolution requires a quiet funeral. Before a stronger, sharper version of you can take its first breath, the older model must be allowed to completely pass away. Growth has always required a trade-off. Not the loss of your true potential, but the total shedding of your old excuses. Perhaps that is why transformation feels so terrifying. You assume you are losing pieces of yourself, when in reality, you are only dropping the illusion of who you thought you were forced to remain. The strongest individuals on this earth are not those who stay perfectly static. They are the ones brave enough to delete internal software that no longer serves their mission. They understand that evolution is impossible, while white-knuckling what should have ended years ago. One day, the world will remember you for the person you repeatedly chose to construct, not for the ghosts you refused to bury. History never honors the people who set up camp inside yesterday. It honors those who possessed the courage to outgrow it. And maybe that is the exact crossroad waiting for your footprint right now. Not to fight harder, not to worry less, but to finally step into a version of yourself that your past wouldn't even recognize. If you have stayed with me until this final sentence, do not let these concepts become just another digital video you scroll past. Treat them as a line in the sand, because your daily reality will not alter the second this playback stops. It will alter the exact moment you begin processing your thoughts differently. Keep this in mind. You can never dictate the external variables, but you will always maintain absolute veto power over who you become as a result of them. So, when this screen goes black, don't immediately dive back into the digital noise. Sit in absolute stillness for exactly 60 seconds. Ask yourself, what is one old fear, one outdated narrative, or one toxic habit I am completely ready to leave behind today? Then open your hands and let it go. Because peace has never been waiting for you down the road. It has always been waiting for the version of you that chooses wisdom over worry. If this message hit home for you today, drop a comment letting me know which specific principle clicked the most. And if you are dead set on forging a sharper, calmer, and wiser mind, hit that subscribe button and lock in for the next step of the journey. Until next time, guard your focus, govern your mindset, and move with absolute purpose.